The beeping would not stop. That was the first thing I remember. A steady, mechanical sound cutting through the dark, pulling me back from somewhere I couldn't name. My eyes felt like they were glued shut. My chest was heavy, like someone had placed a stone on it while I slept. When I finally managed to open my eyes, the light was white and sharp, and I didn't know where I was. A nurse was standing over me, adjusting something near my arm. She had kind eyes. She smiled when she saw me looking at her. "There she is," she said softly. "Welcome back." I tried to speak. Nothing came out. My throat was dry like sand. She handed me a small cup of water, helped me sip it, and told me I was at St. Augustine Medical Center. She told me I had been unconscious for 4 days. She told me I had suffered a severe stroke while I was at my morning water aerobics class at the YMCA, and that the instructor, a young woman named Becca, who had only been teaching the class for 3 months, had been the one to call 911 and ride with me in the ambulance because there was no one else. 4 days. I laid there, staring at the ceiling tiles, and the first thought I had, not about my own body, not about whether I would walk or talk or be the same person I was before, was about my son. Where was he? His name is Derek. He is 34 years old. He works in tech sales, makes good money, drives a new truck every 2 years. I raised him alone after his father left when Derek was 9. I worked double shifts at the hospital. I was a phlebotomist for 26 years, so he could go to a good school, play baseball, go to college. I moved closer to him when I retired 4 years ago, to a small house in Asheville, North Carolina, so we could have more time together. He had told me that sounded great. He had helped me carry boxes. "Has my son been here?" I asked the nurse. My voice came out raspy, barely recognizable. She paused, just for a moment, just long enough. Then she smiled again, the kind of smile that is working very hard. "The doctor will come talk to you soon," she said. That pause told me everything. The doctor's name was Dr. Okafor. He was calm and straightforward, which I appreciated. He sat in the chair next to my bed, folded his hands, and told me plainly that my phone had been recovered from the pool deck at the YMCA. The emergency contact listed was my son. His office had called 31 times over the first 2 days. They had also sent 3 emails to the address I had listed on my intake form. They had reached a voicemail every single time. 31 times. I remember thinking, that is not a number you forget. That is not something you round up or round down. 31 calls, and not one answer. Dr. Okor said they had also contacted the building manager at the address listed on my file, my old address in Charlotte, which I had forgotten to update, and that by the time anyone thought to try Derek's workplace, it was the 3rd day and I was still unconscious. He was very gentle about it. He said these things happen. He said sometimes people's phones are on silent, or they're traveling, or there's a miscommunication. He was giving my son every benefit of the doubt that I was not yet ready to give. "He came on day 4, Dr. Okafor said. Yesterday. He was here for about 2 hours. And then he left?" "Yes." I nodded. I looked at the window. It was raining outside, the slow gray kind of rain that feels like it has no intention of stopping. "Okay," I said. That was all I said. The real story started before the stroke. I want you to understand that, because it matters. Derek and I had not been close. Truly close, for about 3 years. Not since I sold the house in Charlotte and gave him $40,000 toward a down payment on his own place, the way I had promised I would when he got settled. That was supposed to be a moment that brought us together. He thanked me, said I was the best, took me to dinner at a nice restaurant, and then, slowly, so slowly that I didn't notice it at first, he started calling less. It was never a fight. There was no explosion, no moment I could point to. It was more like a tide going out. Gradually, the calls went from weekly to monthly. The visits went from every few months to once a year, twice if I was lucky. Holidays became negotiations. Last Thanksgiving, he told me he and his girlfriend were doing Friendsgiving with her crowd, and it would be easier if I just did my own thing this year. I made a turkey for one and watched the parade on television. I told myself it was normal. Children grow up. They build their own lives. I told myself I was not one of those mothers who clings, who guilt trips, who makes their child feel suffocated. I gave him space. I gave him money when he needed it. I asked for nothing but a phone call now and then. I told myself I was fine. The water aerobics class was my version of being fine. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m., I drove to the YMCA, put on my swim cap, and spent 45 minutes moving my body through warm water with 7 other women, most of them my age or older. I had started going because my doctor said it would be good for my blood pressure. I kept going because it was the part of my week I looked forward to most. I remember the moment it happened. I was in the middle of the pool doing a simple arm rotation when something shifted behind my eyes. It wasn't painful, not exactly. It was more like someone dimmed the lights very fast. I heard Becca say my name. I heard splashing. Then I didn't hear anything. I was in the hospital for 11 days total. Derek came twice. The first time was day 4 for 2 hours. The second time was day 8 for 45 minutes. He brought me a plant that I later found out he had bought from the hospital gift shop downstairs. He sat in the chair where Dr. Okafor had sat and told me I looked good, that I had some color back. He told me his job had been really demanding lately, that his team had a big product launch, and he'd had his phone on Do Not Disturb for most of the past week. He said he was sorry he hadn't gotten there sooner, said it in the tone of someone apologizing for being late to a dinner reservation. I looked at my son, this tall, healthy man in his expensive sneakers, with his phone face up on the arm of the chair, and I felt something I had never felt toward him before. I felt like I was seeing him clearly for the first time. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I asked him how the product launch had gone, and he brightened and talked about it for 20 minutes, and I nodded, and inside I was somewhere very quiet and very still. On day 6, something else happened. Something I did not expect. There was a knock on my hospital room door in the late afternoon, during the quiet hour when the nurses change shifts and the hallways get peaceful. I said, "Come in," expecting a doctor or a food tray. It was a woman I had met exactly once, 8 months earlier, at a neighborhood block party. Her name was Ruth. She lived 4 streets over from me. She was 67, a retired librarian, and she had the most forthright eyes I had ever seen on a person, the kind that look at you directly without any performance of looking. She was carrying a container of homemade soup and a paperback novel. I stared at her. I genuinely did not understand why she was there. She said she had heard what happened through a mutual neighbor, a woman named Pat, who walked her dog past my house every morning and had noticed the car missing for too long. Ruth had called around, found out which hospital, and come. "I didn't know if you had people," she said matter-of-factly, setting the soup on the tray table. "So I came," just like that. "I didn't know if you had people, so I came." I think I cried then. Not because I was sad, exactly. Because someone had said out loud the thing I had been pretending wasn't true, and instead of it being devastating, it was, oddly, a relief. Ruth came back the next day. And the day after that, she brought soup twice and a crossword puzzle book once, and she sat with me for 2 or 3 hours at a time, and we talked about things I hadn't talked about with anyone in years. Books. The particular loneliness of retirement. What it feels like to love a child who has become a stranger to you. She didn't offer solutions. She didn't tell me to pray about it or look on the bright side. She just stayed. On day 9, while Ruth was sitting in the chair, Derek called to say he probably wouldn't make it in again before I was discharged, that things at work were really picking back up, but that he'd check in soon. I said, "Okay, Derek." Ruth was watching me when I hung up. She didn't say anything. She handed me the crossword puzzle book and pointed at 15 across and said she'd been stuck on it for 20 minutes. That was the right thing to do. I was discharged on day 11 with a list of medications, a referral to a physical therapist, and instructions not to drive for 30 days. Ruth drove me home. She had cleaned my kitchen while I was in the hospital. Not intrusively, just wiped things down, cleared out the food that had gone bad, left a note on the counter saying she'd done a small grocery run, and the receipt was on the fridge if I wanted to pay her back. I stood in my kitchen doorway and looked at that note for a long time. The recovery was hard. That part I won't gloss over because it was. The stroke had affected the left side of my body. My arm and leg worked, but they were slow, uncertain, like a car that starts but hesitates. I had good days and bad days. The physical therapy was exhausting. I slept more than I ever had in my life. Derek called 3 times in the first 2 weeks I was home. Once to ask if I was back on my feet. Once to ask a question about whether I still had some document from Dad's estate, and once to tell me about a promotion he'd gotten at work. He did not ask about the therapy. He did not ask about the medication. He did not offer to come. Then, in the 4th week, I found out something. I found out because Pat, the neighbor who walks her dog, mentioned casually while I was sitting on my porch that she had seen Derek struck in the neighborhood back in October while I was still in the hospital. Not on the days he had visited me. A different day entirely. She thought he had stopped to see me, but she'd seen him park 2 streets over and walk in the direction of a house I recognized immediately. It was the house of my neighbor Thomas, a widower 10 years younger than me who I had sold a piece of antique furniture to last spring. A pleasant man. We had talked a few times. He also happened to have mentioned at the block party where I met Ruth that he was friends with a real estate investor who was looking at properties in our neighborhood. I sat with that information for several days before I made a single phone call. The phone call was to my attorney. I want to be careful here about what I say and what I don't say, because I don't know everything. and I don't believe in punishing someone for something I cannot prove. But what my attorney and I discussed was this. I had a will. That will was written 7 years ago, when Derek and I were so close, when I still believed that the $40,000 I had given him was the beginning of something and not the end of it. The will left him the house and the remaining balance of my retirement savings, which, at that point, was $120,000. I had not revisited it since. I revised it. I did not cut Derek out entirely. I am his mother, and that is a fact that does not change regardless of what he does or does not do. But I restructured things significantly. The house, should I pass, would go to a trust to be managed carefully. The $112,000 was redistributed. A portion to Derek. Yes, a portion to a literacy foundation that Ruth had told me about. And a portion to Becca, the young woman who had gotten into an ambulance with a stranger and sat next to me until I reached the hospital because there was no one else to do it. My attorney did not blink at any of this. She said it was my money and my life, and it was time I acted accordingly. I liked her a great deal in that moment. Here's the part I need to tell you, because it is the part that made everything real. 6 weeks after I was discharged. 6 weeks of therapy, of slow mornings, of Ruth bringing soup and books, and the uncomplicated comfort of a person who simply chose to show up. Derek called me. It was a Tuesday evening. I was on the couch watching a documentary about birds that I had no particular investment in, but found soothing. The phone rang, and it was Derek, and his voice was different this time. Tighter. The way a person sounds when they have rehearsed something and are worried they will forget the words. He said he had been thinking. He said he knew he hadn't been as present as he should have been. He said the hospital situation had scared him, looking back on it, and that he felt bad about the timing. He said he wanted to talk about the future. He said he had been in touch with a financial advisor recently, and one of the things that had come up was the question of long-term planning, and that he wondered if we could sit down together sometime and go over things. Just so we were both on the same page about everything. Long-term planning. Both on the same page about everything. I am 63 years old. I spent 26 years drawing other people's blood so my son could play baseball and go to college and buy a new truck every 2 years. I lay unconscious in a hospital for 4 days while his phone rang 31 times. And now he wanted to be on the same page. I looked at the birds on my television. A great blue heron was standing absolutely still in shallow water, waiting. I told Derek that I had already done some planning of my own recently with my attorney and that everything was in good order. I thanked him for calling. I asked about his job because I am his mother and I still care. Even now, even after everything. He talked for a while. I listened. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, and I was not angry and I was not sad. Not exactly. I was clear. There is a difference between those things that I did not fully understand until that moment. Anger is a fire that needs feeding. Sadness is a weight you carry. But clarity is neither of those things. Clarity is simply being able to see without flinching what is actually in front of you. What was in front of me was this: a son who loved me in the way that cost him nothing, and a woman 4 streets over who had shown up with soup for a person she barely knew because she thought I might not have people. One of those things was blood relation. The other one was family. Ruth and I have breakfast on Wednesdays now. She comes to me because she knows mornings are harder with the residual weakness on my left side, and she never makes me feel like that is a burden. She brings the crossword. I make the coffee. We sit at my kitchen table and argue about books and local politics, and whether oat milk is worth the price. And it is the most ordinary thing in the world. And it is one of the best things in my life. I went back to water aerobics last month. Becca clapped when I walked in. The other women in the class, women I had waved to for 2 years without ever learning all their names, hugged me like they knew me. One of them, a woman named Gloria who is 71 and does not tolerate nonsense, looked me square in the eyes and said, "We were worried about you." And I believed her, completely. I have not told Derek about the will. That is not cruelty, it is privacy. He is my son and I love him, and I hope, genuinely, that he becomes someone who earns the kind of love that shows up. Not because of what it means for him in terms of what I leave behind, but because I think living that way, waiting for something to be worth your presence only when it costs you something, is its own punishment. I hope he finds his way out of it. I truly do. But I stopped waiting for him to find it before I let myself live. That is the thing nobody tells you about getting older, about being the mother, about being the one who always showed up. They do not tell you that there will come a moment when you have to decide whether your presence, your love, your time, your remaining years on this earth are things you continue to give away for free to people who have made it clear they do not value them, or whether you are allowed to take them back. You are allowed to take them back. I kept my $112,000. I kept my house. I kept my Wednesday breakfast and my Tuesday water aerobics, and my library of paperbacks that Ruth and I trade back and forth, and my view of the mountains from the back porch that I sat on this morning with a cup of coffee, and watched the light change for 45 minutes without once checking my phone. I kept all of it. And the most surprising thing, the thing I am still getting used to even now, is how light it feels. How unbearably, extraordinarily light. I spent so many years carrying the weight of trying to be needed by someone who had quietly decided they didn't need me, and when I finally set it down, I discovered something I should have known years ago. I was never the burden. I was never the one asking too much. I was the one standing at the edge of the pool, reaching out her hand. And the only question that was ever worth asking was not whether my son would finally take it, but whether I was finally, truly ready to reach toward the people who were already reaching back. Becca. Ruth. Gloria with her no-nonsense eyes and her wet swim cap. The people who show up are the people who were family. Everything else is just a name on a form. If any part of the story felt familiar to you, if you have ever been the one who waited by the phone, who made the turkey for one, who told yourself you were fine when you were not, I want you to know that I see you, and I want you to know that it is not too late. It is not too late to let go of the weight. It is not too late to find the people who will come when you need them. Not because they have to, but because they want to. It is not too late to take up the full amount of space your life was meant to hold. I know, because I am 63 years old, and I am just now learning how to do it. And it is the most alive I have felt in years. There is a kind of accounting that life does quietly, without announcing itself. It does not arrive with fanfare or judgment. It simply waits, and then one day the numbers become visible, and you can no longer pretend you did not see them. Margaret spent decades being the kind of person who showed up. She drew blood at the hospital for 26 years so her son could have a life with more ease than she had. She moved cities to be closer to him when she retired. She gave him $40,000 and asked for nothing but a phone call now and then. And when the moment came, the real moment, the one that strips away everything polite and comfortable and leaves only what is true, 31 unanswered calls told her everything she needed to know about what she had built and what she had only imagined she was building. That is not cruelty on the universe's part. That is clarity. The choices we make consistently over years eventually become the shape of our character, and that character shows up most honestly not in the good times, but in the moments that cost us something. Derek's character showed up in those 4 days. So did Ruth's. So did Becca's. No one had to explain anything. The actions themselves were the explanation. What Margaret did next was not revenge, and it is important to understand that distinction. Revenge requires you to still be anchored to the person who hurt you, still waiting for them to understand what they did, still needing them to feel what you felt. What Margaret did was something quieter and more difficult and ultimately more powerful than revenge. She simply recalibrated. She looked at the evidence in front of her without flinching, and she made decisions that were honest about what that evidence showed. That is intelligence applied to one's own life. Most people never manage it, because it requires being willing to be disappointed by someone you love, and then being willing to move anyway. It is one of the hardest things a person can do. It does not feel like strength when you are in the middle of it. It feels like loss, but loss and growth are often the same experience from different angles. The will was not about money. The $112,000 was not the point. The point was that for the first time in years, Margaret was making a decision that was honest about her actual life, rather than the life she had been hoping for. She was acting from clarity rather than hope, and there is an enormous difference between those two things. Hope, when it is not grounded in reality, is just a way of postponing the truth. Clarity is what happens when you finally let the truth arrive. Ruth showed up with soup because that is who Ruth is. Becca rode in an ambulance with a stranger because that is who Becca is. Those choices also have a shape, also become a character, also attract and build a certain kind of life. The same force that reveals who people are in hard moments also quietly draws certain people toward each other. Margaret found Ruth not because of luck, but because Margaret was the kind of person that someone like Ruth would be drawn to help. Goodness tends to recognize goodness, even between strangers. The lesson is not that family fails you and strangers save you. The lesson is simpler and harder than that. It is that the people who consistently choose you through inconvenience, without calculation, without an eye on what they will eventually receive, those are the people worth building your life around. Not the ones who share your name, the ones who show up, and you, sitting here right now, you already know which people in your life those are. The only question is whether you are ready to let that knowledge change how you spend your remaining time.